2.5 minutes after blastoff, Apollo 11's massive first stage had powered the astronauts to a speed of 6,200 miles per hour and an altitude of 35 miles.
Downrange 35 miles, 30 miles high, standing by for the outboard engine cut down now.
As the fuel ran out, explosive bolts jettisoned the spent stage, and the engines in stage 2 fired up.
Station. And ignition.
The huge rocket, racing skywards with the astronauts on board, was being flown from the ground by Mission Control in Houston, Texas. But Mission Control was not as high-tech as it looked.
The console we sat at had lights on it, small indicator lights, that would mirror switch positions in the spacecraft, and we were monitoring what the crew did to the computer, and we could see what the computer saw. And actually, the computer screens that we looked at in our consoles in Mission Control weren't computer screens at all. They were televisions. All the letters or characters were all hand-drawn. I don't necessarily mean with a brush, but I mean they were printed on a slide.
All the screens were linked to Mission Control's mainframe computers. Despite filling a whole floor of the building, compared to modern computers of today, their total processing power was minute.
You might say that all the computers in Mission Control will have more or less the power of one of today's laptops.
But running a whole space mission on the capacity of a single modern laptop was luxury compared to the computer power on board the spacecraft itself.
The computer in the spacecraft was maybe somewhere between a digital watch and a cell phone. I think a little closer to a digital watch. Very, very different. Extremely primitive.
Roger, 11, we'll pass that on, and it certainly looks like you're well on your way now.
As Mission Control plotted the rocket's progress 100 miles above the Earth, Apollo 11 was leaving the atmosphere and entering Earth orbit. The crew now jettisoned the final stage of the rocket to prepare for the 260,000-mile journey to the moon.
Apollo 11, over. Go ahead, 11.
As Apollo flew on, hundreds of communications ping-ponged between the spaceship and the ground. Failing to comprehend just one message could spell disaster. This placed everyone from the most junior team member to the flight director himself under immense stress.
It almost sounds like gibberish with all of this communication going on.
Still looking good.
Normally in Mission Control, I would listen to 5 to 7 communications simultaneously. With practice, you can pick out that communication which is essential to you doing your job.
But 3 days and 200,000 miles into the flight, Mission Control did miss the significance of a cryptic message from the astronauts.
Do you have any idea where the import is with respect to us? Semi.
The crew required information on the current position of the S-4B, the final stage of the rocket which had been jettisoned away 2 days earlier. This short message hit an extraordinary turn of events. Apollo 11 wasn't alone in space.
There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be?
Traveling alongside Apollo 11 was a mysterious object, like this one filmed on a later mission. If the object wasn't part of Apollo's rocket, it could be only one thing: a UFO.
Mike decided he thought he could see it in the telescope, and he was able to do that. And when it was in one position, that it had a series of ellipses. But when you made it real sharp, it was sort of L-shaped. That didn't tell us very much.
NASA knew very little about the object reported by the Apollo 11 crew. It was obviously an unidentified flying object, but such objects were not uncommon, and the history of even Earth orbit space flights going back over the previous years indicated that several crews saw objects.
Despite having a clear view of the UFO, the crew were wary of reporting it to Mission Control.
Now, obviously, the three of us were not going to blurt out, "Hey, Houston, we got something moving alongside of us, and we don't know what it is. You know, can you tell us what it is?" We weren't about to do that, because we know that those transmissions would be heard by all sorts of people, and who knows what somebody would have demanded that we turn back because of aliens or whatever the reason is. So we didn't do that, but we did decide we just cautiously ask Houston, how far away was the S4B?
Unaware of the drama unfolding in space, Mission Control radioed the position back to Apollo 11.
Apollo 11, Houston, the S4B is about 6,000 nautical miles from you now, over.
And a few moments later, they came back and said something like it was 6,000 miles away because of the maneuver. So we really didn't think we were looking at something that far away. So we decided that after a while of watching it, it was time to go to sleep and not to talk about it anymore until we came back in debriefing.
To this day, whatever it was the crew saw has never been positively identified or officially acknowledged.
The possibility that you might encounter aliens in space has to be considered in a very sensible and positive and realistic way. There are a lot of people within the program who went off later and became convinced that UFOs existed. And that led to some concern on NASA's part, where they got the agreement of the crew never to publicly talk about these things for fear of ridicule.
After this close encounter, the crew hoped for a good night's sleep, but they were in for a surprise. Another strange event would disturb them, not outside in the vastness of space, but right inside the spacecraft itself.
I remembered as I began to make an attempt to go to sleep, and all of a sudden I would see a flash somewhere, and before I could turn or get my eye on the flash,